body of the mother or of anyone else.
Good afternoon, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, Mexico, working on oil painting memories present. Alright, today I'm going to start in with this left side here. I kind of like this, but what I'm going to do here is do another scene from a little cabin that I rented at the base of Wheeler Peak shortly after I had gotten out of the nut house and was still on risperidol. And if anyone doesn't know what risperidol is, it's an antipsychotic. It's basically a lobotomy pill. It cuts you off from your feelings, it cuts you off from your thoughts. It basically leaves you completely a useless mass of impotent, fat heap of shit that's more about being a convenience for the societal standards and medical staff than it has anything to do with healing or helping schizophrenia. So that's all I have to say about that. It's the most ridiculously horrible thing in the world. Thorazine is more helpful, and that's not that helpful either. So, anyway, I'm going to have a fog. A little house surrounded by fog and tall trees, and that's what's going to be right here, so we're going to start that.
We also get to experience the depth of who we are, which also means we don't have to keep running. And then the issue becomes then, how do you incorporate that, how do you integrate that into your life? And so I have to emphasize here the importance of integration. So don't expect the insight, which is like a door opening, to save you, because it won't. Because you can have that experience in the moment under the influence of the particular substance that you've been working with. But unless you are intent on taking that substance all the time, which you can't, then you better have to find ways of integrating that insight into your life. And that takes daily work. That takes daily work. So the post-ceremony, or the post-event, the post-experience integration is at least as important as the experience itself. Otherwise, you're just going to keep going back, looking for the same experience over and over again. And nothing necessarily will have shifted for you. There are some people, with or without substances, who are able to have a transformative, transcendental experience that really does rewire them permanently. But I've met very few of those people. I've met very few of them, if any. I know of some. But for most of us, it's ongoing work. So the experiences can open those doors of perception. They can give us glimpses or deep but momentary experiences of our true selves. But then the work is to go back and keep clearing out all the accumulated debris that we've took on ever since early infancy to compensate for the loss. So when you understand my definition of trauma, which has to do with that disconnect, then you understand that trauma has many different manifestations. There's a psychological, emotional aspect of trauma, which is that disconnect from the self, and therefore also a relationship to the world. So the traumatized person, and by my definition, most of us are traumatized. We live in a different world. We live in a world where we're alone. We live in a world which is perhaps dangerous. We live in a world that's indifferent. We live in a world where we're constantly having to work to validate ourselves. That's the world we live in. And the Buddha said very clearly that it's with our thoughts, with our minds that we create the world. That's the world that we create. The problem is, this is the task for modern psychology perhaps, this is where modern psychology can so usefully blend with ancient spiritual teaching, is that before our minds create the world creates our minds. And so we have to go back to who we were before the world created our mind. In terms of mental health, depression, anxiety, addiction, psychoses, these all begin as compensations. Right? How can depression be a compensation? Well, let me give you an example. Let's say you have a 2-year-old and she's angry with you. Incidentally, if you do have a 2-year-old and she's not angry with you, you haven't done your job. It's that simple. Because she cannot have a cookie before dinner. And she can't have a shiny knife to play with. and she can't pull the dog's tail, and she can't climb on the windowsill when the window is open. You have to say no. And 2-year-olds, like many of us as adults even, can't distinguish between their needs and their wants. So when you frustrate somebody's perceived needs, they get aggressive. Frustration is the engine of aggression, as my friend, the psychologist Gordon Neufeld says. So the child gets aggressively angry because she couldn't have that cookie. Nothing wrong with that, so long as you're not threatened by the anger. But what if you grew up in a family where there was rage a lot, where your parents were in conflict, rageful conflict, and you have this intrinsic and innate, implicit memory of fear whenever you experience or witness anger, and then unwittingly you give the message to your 2-year-old that good little girls don't get angry. What the child is getting is not that good little girls don't get angry, but that angry little girls don't get loved. And what will she do with the anger? Since she can't do without your love, she cannot. She's going to push the anger down. What's the word for pushing something down? Depression. And 30 years later, she'll be diagnosed with depression, and somebody will hand her a pill. And that pill, which I'm not against, I've taken them, they can be helpful, but they're not the answer. The answer is to actually, what is it that I pushed down? And why did I? And do I still need to? In other words, to reconnect again with the real self. So that mental health issues, they all begin with compensations. The tuning out of ADHD is not a disease. It's a coping mechanism to deal with overwhelming stress. These temporary compensatory mechanisms become a source of pathology later on. Physical health. When you suppress yourself in order to please others, because of the mind and the body being one unit, they're inseparable. This is not my particular insight. This is what science shows us. And as I was saying to a medical colleague just a few minutes ago, that the problem with medicine is you keep talking about evidence-based practice, but we ignore much of the evidence. And the evidence is that when you suppress emotions, you're actually suppressing the immune system as well, for the simple reason that you can't separate the mind from the body. Scientifically, you can't. And the consequence is then the immune system will attack you, and now you have autoimmune disease like multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis, or you get cancer. That too began as a compensation. That pushing down of emotion was how you compensated for your parents' inability to handle your emotions. Trauma has then impacts on physical health, on relationships, and finally, of course, it's got a spiritual aspect because, and spirituality is such a loaded word in the sense that we all load it with their own particular meanings, but I'll give you my own general understanding of it, which is spirituality is the awareness that we're not our personalities, that we're not just our bodies, we're not just our thoughts and our emotions, there's something deeper, more eternal, more connected about us, and that connection is with the universe. Well, when you're traumatized, you shut that down too. So this is where the plant medicines can be so helpful. And I've known people that are healing from significant autoimmune diseases that they were given up for dead by medical doctors. People that are healing or have healed from multiple sclerosis, from suicidal depression. Last year we worked with a woman in a retreat that had tried to kill herself 17 times. Where is the healing coming from? Well, the very meaning of the word healing means wholeness. And we become whole when we reconnect with ourselves. I'll leave you the final quote before I take questions and comments. Thomas Merton, the spiritual teacher, Catholic monk, talked about surrendering, conquering ourselves, or allowing the spirit to conquer us. So self-conquest is not a willful act of self-abnegation, but is actually surrendering to something greater than we are. As a Catholic, you call that the Holy Spirit, but you can call it whatever you want. And he says, in order to gain possession ourselves, we have to have some confidence, some hope of victory. And in order to keep that hope alive, we must usually have some taste of victory. We must know what victory is and like it better than defeat. Now, at the very least, this work with the plant spirits can give us a taste of that victory, can give us a glimpse of ourselves, can give us a glimpse of reality. And that can be the beginning of the path to healing. Thank you. Thank you.
So, as we haven't had any sessions with questions and answers yet, haven't said anything about that, our normal hope and expectation is that it be a question and not a statement, because that can sometimes go on too long. In this case, it's up to Gabor, because we actually have a little over 15 minutes, so I'll let him guide that. But the other thing I want you to do is come to these microphones, because everything's being recorded, and just line up on either side if you want to ask a question. Thank you.
Hi, Rocky. I'd like to know how could one, me, go about getting a treatment this for
Treatment.
yes, psilocybin. Where does one go for a safe place to do that?
Okay. There are people here. I think everybody sees you. There are people here that work with all kinds of modalities, including ayahuasca, including psilocybin. So those of you that work with such substances and are willing to help this friend, please meet him afterwards. You're welcome. Okay, should we go back? Okay, whoever's next. Go ahead. Okay.
Yeah, since I have myself a 3-year-old, a beautiful little daughter,
Yeah.
a question connected to that kind of topic you
Yeah.
scratched.
Yeah.
What's your suggestion? What can I do better than what has been done to generations of little people before us?
Well, let's make it more personal. In a sense of trauma that I described, do you recognize yourself?
Yes, I'm recognizing myself as the parent that gets angry and annoyed.
Okay. All right. So that's what you can do, because your anger and your annoyance, your child will interpret only in one way.
Yeah, I realize where it comes from.
Which is that there's something wrong with her. The child will not recognize you as being angry or annoyed. She'll recognize herself as being deficient and flawed.
Yeah.
Because children are narcissists. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I mean in the actual technical sense. They think it's all about them. So the best that you can do for her is to do your own healing work. It's just, and really taking it on. Now, you already are, otherwise you wouldn't be here asking the question.
Yeah.
So your daughter's already way ahead of where you were at the same age, because your parents probably were not asking them themselves these questions, were they?
Probably not, and I actually have to thank you to remind me to continue my personal journey.
That's what you can do for your child. I will also recommend that you read one of the books I wrote on, which is on parenting, so hold on to your kids. That will tremendously help you with your parenting, but that's important than the work you're doing on yourself.
I didn't understand your answer.
Okay, I've written a book called Hold On to Your Kids.
Oh.
It's for parents. Okay? I wrote it with a friend of mine who I quoted, Roy Newfeld, the psychologist. It's a very important parenting book, I'll promise you that 100%. But I'm also saying, reading that book, it's important, but it's not as important as the work that you're going to keep doing on yourself. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm not sure, is the mic on? Okay. Okay.
Thank you very much for your talk.
Okay.
A few weeks ago, I attended the Psychedelic Psychotherapy Conference in Victoria. You gave a wonderful talk there. You cited the work of the British psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott. I was really impressed with it. Today, you spoke about compensation for early childhood injuries as part of trauma, and it sounded to me very close to the work of Alfred Adler. And I wonder if that is also someone you use in your work.
That's interesting because you may not know this, but I'm actually in a play at the Vancouver Cultural Center, and tonight is the last performance. I portray myself. It's not a big stretch, but the play, which is about childhood trauma, somebody asked the same question about Adler, and my answer is simply that any work that I do, any work that anybody does, is always built on foundations that other people have laid. So Adler's awareness of family systems and all that certainly has informed my work. But it's not that I follow any one particular discipline. I just take what I can from wherever I can find it and then just shape it into my own particular formulation of it. But yeah, Adler's certainly there in the mix. Thank you. Gavin, hi.
Hi, Gavin. Just wondering if you could speak with us a little bit about when shame comes up and the origins of shame as you relate it to repressed emotion and how we might work skillfully with shame, especially with these types of plant experiences.
Okay. It's a great question, thank you. So, I'll tell you about a psilocybin experience I had this summer, and you heard it last night at the play because you were there. So, but I'll tell it to this group. So I'm lying in San Francisco on a speaking trip, and I have a day off, and so I'm using the day to have a psilocybin experience with a therapist whose name is Francois. I'm at a friend's house, and this is where I said to the guy, "You better give me a big whack, because they're very thick-minded," so she does. And 2 hours later, I'm lying there on the mat, curled up like a baby, sobbing. And I'm looking at Francois, realizing that her name is Francois, that she's a therapist, I'm having a mushroom experience, my name is Gabor, I'm 71 years old, and so on and so forth. I'm fully aware of present reality, but at the same time, I'm in the configuration of a baby who's crying and all curled up, tears are coming out my face, and I'm looking at Francois, and I know she's not my mother, but she is my mother. So I'm there simultaneously, I'm there as adult and infant. And the difference between Francois and my birth mother is that this mother, Francois, can actually receive and hear my deepest grief, which is my mother couldn't. And that's why I disconnected. And I say to her, Francois, mother, I say to her, I'm so sorry for having made your life so difficult. So that's me, as a 6-month-old, as a 1-year-old Jewish infant under Nazi occupation, with a mother whose parents died in Auschwitz and whose husband is away in a forced labor camp. And her terror and her unhappiness, I take on as my fault. I am so sorry for having made your life so difficult. That's the original guilt. That's the original sin, if you like, that we all suffer from, that we couldn't make our parents happy. It's got nothing to do with anything we did. And so that original shame goes back that early, before we had any concept of right or wrong. And shame, when you think of what shame is, what does shame look like? Here's what it looks like. The neck falls down, the neck is bent, the eyes are averted, and the body slumps. That's a physiological state. So shame is a physiological state which represents an overactivation. As a physician, you know this. It represents an overactivation of a part of our nervous system called the parasympathetic nervous system, as opposed to the sympathetic part, or the willful parts. The parasympathetic has to do with slackness and vegetation and rest. And so when this is overactive, what it looks like, you can put a 9-month-old baby into a shame state.
Alright, got a little
Long
heavy-handed
before
with
the
it
baby has
there.
any concept
Kind of
what
drowned
shame
out that
is.
eye almost totally.
There's
You can still see it in the
formulation for
facture and very faintly through the fog of
You
the
can
house
put a
and the
baby
tree
into a
behind the
shame
bottle.
state, this state, simply by
There we
letting
go.
the mother look into the baby's eyes,
So that develops a
have
little
them locked
scene,
in
little
this
cabin
cocoon.
scene
happy, joyful.
next to Wheeler
infant.
Peak. Lady cut me a good deal renting that place.
And the mother averts
Filled up
her
a
eyes,
propane tank. I had no idea how much
The
they
baby
cost.
goes
I'd never
into
had a
shame.
propane heat or
which is to say
stove. And
that shame is all about this
$600 later, I
connection
think there's probably still
to love.
propane in that giant ass tank.
Before
But anyway,
you did anything wrong.
they were nice people.
Now, when you reconnect,
But pretty desolate
With the
time. And
that's what I talked about.
yeah, it was just a horrible
That's right.
fog. You know,
You
it's hard to
overcome
remember
the shame.
anything really clearly from
So
the, what
the
was it,
answer to
say,
shame is love. Not a whole lot of
3 to 4
reassurance
years that I was on that
nothing wrong. No.
risperidol
The
until
answer to
I
shame is
met a
love.
different doc who was
And the answer
informed
to
on
love is
ADHD
shame.
and changed my medication.
And for me,
And
that's
if it weren't for him, I
experience
probably would have killed
was
myself a
really
long time ago.
instructive because
So anyway, that's
I
that.
knew it intellectually already. But this
Adam
time
Sturch
actually
broadcasting
explained.
from the Mushroom Mansion House, Mexico, working on oil painting memories present. Thanks for watching and have a good day.
Also, when we have those